The dying sunset painted the dusty town of Rattlesnake Gulch in crimson, and gold when Preston Quinn first saw her riding in, her honey-colored hair billowing like a flag behind her. The year was 1876, and Preston's hand trembled as it hovered over his Colt revolver, the familiar weight suddenly unbearable. It had been 3 weeks since the ambush that left him with a bullet in his shoulder and his pride in tatters. You planning to draw that weapon or just admire it all day? The woman called out, dismounting her chestnut mare with the grace of someone born to the saddle. Preston's fingers slipped from the gun handle. "Wasn't planning either, madam." His voice was raspy, unused. Since returning from the doctor's care, he'd barely spoken to anyone, preferring the company of whiskey and regret in his small room above the saloon. "Tessa Morgan," she introduced herself, extending a gloved hand that Preston reluctantly shook. "I'm looking for work." "Plenty of that around," Preston muttered, wincing as he shifted his weight. The wound still burned like hellfire whenever he moved wrong. Saloons hiring girls, ranch hands needed at the Blackwater spread. Tessa's green eyes narrowed. "I don't dance and I don't herd cattle, I track, I hunt. And from what I hear, you used to be the best gun in the territory before the Calloway gang shot you up." Preston stiffened. "Who's asking?" "The new sheriff. He said if I wanted information on finding the Calloways, you'd be the man to talk to." She tilted her head, studying the way he favored his right side. "Though he failed to mention you're still half dead." Preston turned away. "Sheriff Daniels talks too much. He also mentioned you're the only survivor of their last robbery, 3 good men dead, including your brother." The words hit Preston like physical blows. The memory of his younger brother's body sprawled in the dirt flashed before his eyes, and he nearly staggered. "What's it to you? I've been tracking the Calloways for 6 months. They killed my father in a raid near Santa Fe. I aim to bring them to justice." Preston laughed bitterly. "Justice? Out here, lady, you're more likely to find gold falling from the sky." Tessa stepped closer, close enough that Preston could smell lavender and leather. "Help me find them. You know their patterns, their hideouts." "I can't even draw my gun anymore," he admitted, the words tasting like poison. "Doctor says the nerves are damaged, might never get full strength back." He flexed his fingers, demonstrating the weakness. "Besides, you're just one woman against 6 killers." "7," she corrected. "They picked up another man in Socorro." She reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I'm not just one woman, I've got this." Preston unfolded the paper to find a U.S. Marshal's badge and credentials. "You're a lawwoman." "One of the first female deputies," she said with quiet pride. "Though they don't exactly advertise it. Most folks just see the badge and don't look too closely at who's wearing it." Preston handed the credentials back. "Still doesn't change the fact that I'm useless in a fight now." Tessa studied him for a long moment. "Maybe, but your brain still works, doesn't it? I need information more than I need another gun." The saloon doors behind them swung open and Sheriff Daniels stepped out, his gray mustache twitching with approval. "I see you two have met. Deputy Morgan here comes highly recommended by the Federal Marshal's office." Preston scowled. "You set this up. Town council's tired of you drinking yourself to death on that pittance we pay you as a deputy," Daniels said bluntly. "Either help the lady or turn in your badge." Preston's hand reflexively went to the star pinned to his vest, a badge he hadn't earned in weeks. "Fine," he growled, "but I need a drink first." Tessa's smile was quick and determined. "After you brief me, drinks cloud judgment." For the first time in weeks, Preston felt something other than pain and self-pity. It might have been irritation, but it was something. "You always this bossy, Deputy Morgan?" "Only when lives are at stake," she replied evenly. "Now, where can we talk privately?" Preston led her to the sheriff's office. A small wooden building with bars on the windows and a persistent smell of tobacco and gun oil. The familiar environment both comforted and unsettled him. It had been his second home before the ambush. "Start from the beginning," Tessa said, sitting across from him at the desk and pulling out a small notebook. Preston closed his eyes, letting the memories surface. It was a routine money transfer. Bank to bank, Rattlesnake Gulch to Silver Creek. Me, my brother Daniel, and 2 other deputies. We'd done it a dozen times before. How did they know about it? That's the question that's been eating at me. Only a handful of people knew the schedule. Preston's voice grew harder. Someone talked. Someone in this town. Tessa made a note. "Do you have suspicions?" Preston hesitated, then nodded toward the window. Across the street stood the Territorial Bank, its facade freshly painted. New bank manager Peter Wilkins. Arrived 6 months ago. Real friendly type. Too friendly if you ask me. "I'll look into him," Tessa promised. "What about the ambush itself? What can you tell me about how the Calloways operate?" For the next hour, Preston recounted every detail he could remember: the location, the positions of the attackers, the weapons they used. As he spoke, the fog of alcohol and grief began to clear from his mind. He hadn't realized how much he needed to talk about it until the words were pouring out of him. "They're led by Jebediah Calloway, mean as a rattlesnake and twice as quick," he explained. "His brother Theodore handles the planning. The rest are hired guns, except for Jebediah's son, Malcolm. Just a kid, really. 17 or 18, but already killed 3 men that I know of." Tessa listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions but mostly letting Preston talk. When he finally ran out of words, she looked up from her extensive notes. "Thank you," she said quietly. "This is more than I've learned in months of tracking them." Preston slumped back in his chair, suddenly exhausted. The effort of remembering, of reliving the worst day of his life, had drained what little energy he had. "What's your plan?" "First, I verify your suspicions about the bank manager. Then I follow the money trail. The Calloways have to be spending or stashing their take somewhere." "They have a cabin," Preston said suddenly, a memory surfacing. "Daniel mentioned it once, said he'd heard rumors of a hideout in the Diablo Mountains, near an abandoned mining claim." Tessa's eyes lit up. "That's exactly the kind of information I need." She stood, gathering her notes. "Get some rest, Mr. Quinn. We'll continue tomorrow." Preston watched her leave, a strange mixture of emotions swirling within him. For the first time since the ambush, he felt a spark of purpose. Whether it was vengeance or justice that motivated him, he couldn't say, but it was better than the emptiness that had consumed him for weeks. That night, Preston dreamed of his brother. Not of his death, as he usually did, but of fishing together in the creek behind their childhood home. He woke with tears on his cheeks, but a clarity he hadn't felt in a long time. He skipped his morning whiskey. When Tessa knocked on his door an hour later, he was dressed and ready, his badge polished for the first time in weeks. "You look better," she observed, handing him a cup of coffee from the hotel restaurant. "Feel worse," he admitted with a wry smile. "Turns out sobriety hurts." "Pain means you're healing," she said matter-of-factly. "I've been busy this morning. Sheriff Daniels helped me access the bank records. There are some irregularities in the accounts, just as you suspected." Preston sipped the coffee, savoring the bitter heat. "Wilkins?" "No proof yet, but enough to warrant closer observation. I also sent telegrams to my contacts along the Calloway's likely escape route. If they've been spending freely, someone will have noticed." They spent the day investigating the bank, questioning townsfolk about Wilkins and his activities, and poring over maps of the Diablo Mountains. Preston found his mind sharpening with each hour away from the bottle, old instincts resurfacing like muscle memory. As evening approached, They sat together on the hotel's porch, watching the sunset paint the dusty street in shades of amber and gold. "Why a marshal?" Preston asked suddenly. "Can't be easy being a woman in this line of work." Tessa's gaze remained on the horizon. "My father was a circuit judge. He believed in the law when most people out here only believe in guns. After he was murdered, continuing his work seemed the only way to honor him." She glanced at Preston. "What about you? Why a deputy?" Preston traced the rim of his coffee cup with his thumb. "Fell into it, I suppose. Daniel always wanted to wear the badge. I just followed him like I always did. He was the brave one. Yet here you are, still standing. That takes a different kind of courage." Preston snorted. "Surviving isn't courage. It is when every instinct tells you to give up," she countered softly. Something in her tone made Preston look at her more closely. The fading light caught the gold flecks in her green eyes, and for a moment he saw beyond the badge to the woman beneath, determined, yes, but carrying her own wounds. The moment was broken by the thunder of approaching hooves. A rider galloped down the main street, pulling up hard in front of the hotel. It was Jimmy Hayes, a young ranch hand from the Richardson place outside town. "Deputy Quinn," the boy called, his face flushed with exertion. "Riders spotted at the old Wilcox property. 6, maybe 7 men." Preston and Tessa exchanged a quick glance. "The Calloways?" she asked. "Could be," Preston replied, already standing. "The Wilcox place has been abandoned for years. Perfect spot to plan a job. Or to set a trap," Tessa added grimly. She turned to Jimmy. "Get Sheriff Daniels. Tell him to gather whatever men he can trust, but be discreet. We don't know who might be feeding information to the gang." As Jimmy rode off, Preston headed for his room. "I need to get my gear." Tessa followed him up the narrow stairs. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Preston opened his trunk and removed his gun belt, the familiar weight both comforting and daunting. "Guess we'll find out." His fingers trembled as he buckled the belt, but he managed to secure it. Drawing the gun would be another matter entirely. Tessa watched him struggle to lift the revolver from its holster. "Let me see your shoulder." Reluctantly, Preston unbuttoned his shirt enough to reveal the angry red scar where the bullet had torn through muscle and shattered bone. Tessa examined it with a professional detachment that still couldn't quite mask her concern. "The doctor did good work," she said, "but you're still healing." "What exercises did he recommend?" Preston looked away. "Squeezing a ball, lifting small weights. Didn't see the point." "Because you'd already decided you were finished," she said, not unkindly. "But you're not. Not yet." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small rubber ball. "Start now. Every minute you're not using that hand for something else, you squeeze this." Preston took the ball with a raised eyebrow. "You always carry rehabilitation equipment," Tessa's mouth quirked. "Took it from the doctor's office this morning. Had a feeling you weren't following medical advice." Despite himself, Preston felt a smile tugging at his lips. "You're something else, Deputy Morgan." "So I've been told," she replied with a hint of amusement. "Now, about tonight, we need a plan that doesn't rely on your shooting ability." By the time darkness fell, they had assembled a small posse of trusted men: Sheriff Daniels, the blacksmith Jacob Miller, and 2 ranch hands Preston vouched for. They approached the Wilcox property on foot, leaving their horses half a mile back to avoid detection. The abandoned farmhouse sat dark and silent in a clearing, but lamplight flickered in the barn beyond. Preston and Tessa crouched behind a fallen oak, studying the property. "I count 2 guards," Tessa whispered. "One by the barn door, one patrolling the perimeter." Preston nodded. "If it's the Calloways, Jebediah will be inside with his brother. They never separate during a job." "We need to take the guards quietly," Tessa said. "Then surround the barn." Preston squeezed the rubber ball in his pocket, feeling the weakness in his fingers. I can handle the perimeter guard if you take the one at the door. Tessa gave him a searching look. With that shoulder, don't need to shoot him, Preston said grimly. Just need to get close enough. She hesitated, then nodded. Be careful, signal when you're in position. Preston moved through the shadows with the stealth of a man who'd spent years tracking outlaws. His shoulder ached, but the pain sharpened his focus rather than hindering it. He circled wide, approaching the patrolling guard from behind as the man paused to light a cigarette. The momentary flare of the match illuminated a face. Preston recognized one of the men who'd been present at the ambush that killed his brother. Cold rage flooded through him, but he tamped it down, forcing himself to think tactically. When the guard moved on, Preston followed, closing the distance until he was just a few paces behind. He picked up a rock and tossed it into the bushes to his right. The guard turned toward the noise and Preston struck, driving his good shoulder into the man's back and clamping a hand over his mouth as they fell. They struggled briefly, but despite his injured shoulder, Preston was fueled by determination and months of suppressed rage. He knocked the man unconscious with the butt of his knife, then bound and gagged him with strips torn from the guard's own bandana. Across the clearing, he saw a flash of movement as Tessa dispatched the second guard with similar efficiency. She signaled to Sheriff Daniels and the others, who began to move into position surrounding the barn. Preston joined Tessa at the barn door. "Ready," she whispered. He nodded, trying to ignore the tremor in his gun hand. "Ready." The next moments passed in a blur of shouting and gunfire. They burst through the door to find 5 men seated around a table covered with maps and money. Preston recognized Jebediah Calloway instantly, a tall, hawk-faced man with cold eyes and a shock of white hair. "U.S. Marshal," Tessa shouted. "Everyone freeze." For a fraction of a second, surprise held the outlaws motionless. Then chaos erupted. Guns were drawn, tables overturned. Preston dove behind a stack of hay bales, cursing as pain shot through his injured shoulder. Gunfire erupted from outside as Sheriff Daniels and the others engaged. Inside, Tessa exchanged shots with 2 of the gang members while Preston struggled to steady his revolver. His fingers refused to cooperate, the gun wavering uselessly in his grip. A bullet splintered the wood beside his head, and he looked up to see Jebediah Calloway advancing on him, a cruel smile twisting his features. "Well, if it ain't the Quinn boy," Calloway drawled. "Thought we finished you months ago. Shame we gotta do this twice." Preston tried again to lift his gun, but his arm trembled violently. He'd never make the shot, and they both knew it. "Your brother died crying for his mama," Calloway taunted, raising his pistol. "Let's see if you do the same." A shot rang out, but it wasn't from Calloway's gun. The outlaw staggered, a look of surprise crossing his face as blood blossomed on his shirt. Behind him stood Tessa, her revolver still smoking. "Preston," she called, ducking as another bullet whizzed past her head. "The door." Following her gaze, Preston saw a young man barely more than a boy slipping out the back of the barn. Malcolm Calloway, Jebediah's son. With a surge of determination, Preston forced himself to his feet and gave chase. The night air hit him like a splash of cold water as he burst out of the barn. Ahead, Malcolm Calloway was running toward the trees, a saddlebag full of money clutched to his chest. Preston's shoulder screamed in protest as he pushed himself faster. He tackled the young outlaw just before he reached the tree line, sending them both crashing to the ground. The saddlebag split open, spilling bank notes into the dirt. Malcolm scrambled for his gun, but Preston kicked it away. "Don't," Preston gasped, trying to ignore the excruciating pain radiating from his shoulder. Malcolm's face, illuminated by the moonlight, was a younger version of his father's, but without the years of cruelty etched into it. "You gonna kill me like you killed my pa?" The boy spat. "Your pa killed my brother," Preston replied, struggling to catch his breath. "And 3 other good men. He got what was coming to him." "So shoot me then," Malcolm challenged, though fear flickered in his eyes. "Get your revenge." Preston slowly pulled his revolver, his hand shaking not just from weakness now but from the weight of the moment. The boy before him was a killer, yes, but also a victim of his father's influence. Daniel would have known what to do, Preston thought bitterly. Daniel always did the right thing. As Preston struggled with the gun, his damaged muscles refusing to cooperate, he heard footsteps behind him. "You don't need it anymore," Tessa's voice came softly as she placed a hand on his arm. "It's over." Preston looked up at her, saw the understanding in her eyes, and something inside him broke. The revolver slipped from his fingers, landing silently in the dirt. "I can't," he whispered. "I know," she replied, kneeling beside him. "That's why I'm here." She turned to Malcolm. "You're under arrest, son, but you're young enough that a judge might show mercy if you cooperate." The fight seemed to drain out of the boy, and he nodded slowly. Back at the barn, they found Sheriff Daniels and the others securing the surviving members of the Calloway gang. Jebediah Calloway lay dead, along with one of his men. Theodore Calloway was wounded but alive, cursing vividly as Jacob Miller tied his hands. Bank manager Wilkins was with them, Tessa told Preston, gesturing to a well-dressed man sitting dejected in the corner. "Just like you suspected. He's been their inside man for over a year." Preston nodded, too exhausted to feel satisfaction. His shoulder throbbed mercilessly, and the adrenaline that had carried him through the fight was fading fast. "What happens now?" "Now we take them in," Tessa said, studying him with concern. "And get that shoulder looked at. You reopened the wound." Preston glanced down, noticing for the first time the blood seeping through his shirt. "Worth it," he murmured. Then his knees buckled. Tessa caught him before he hit the ground, her strength surprising for her slender frame. "I've got you," she said, her voice steady in his ear as darkness closed in. Preston woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains and the smell of coffee. He was in a bed at the hotel, his shoulder freshly bandaged. Beside him, Tessa sat reading a telegram, her honey-colored hair loose around her shoulders instead of in its usual practical braid. "Morning," she said when she noticed his eyes open. "Doctor says you're lucky you didn't tear out all his careful stitching." Preston winced as he tried to sit up. "How long was I out?" "Just overnight. The prisoners are secure in the jail. Federal marshals will arrive tomorrow to transport them to Santa Fe for trial." She handed him a cup of coffee. "Sheriff Daniels says your job is waiting when you're ready. Seems you're quite the hero in town now." Preston took a careful sip of coffee. "What about you? Heading back to report to your superiors?" Tessa hesitated, then set the telegram aside. "Actually, I've been offered a permanent position here in the territory. Seems bringing down the Calloway gang has impressed the right people." A warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee spread through Preston's chest. "So you're staying, thinking about it," she replied with a small smile. "Depends on a few things. Such as whether my partner is going to keep up with his rehabilitation exercises." She tossed him the rubber ball, which he caught reflexively with his injured hand. The movement hurt, but not as much as he expected. "Partner," Preston repeated, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Sheriff Daniels suggested it, said we make a good team." She leaned forward, her green eyes serious. "But only if you're committed to getting better. No more whiskey breakfasts, no more feeling sorry for yourself." Preston squeezed the ball, feeling a strength in his fingers that hadn't been there before. "I think I can manage that. Good." Tessa's smile widened. "Because I have plans for you, Preston Quinn." "Do these plans include dinner? Once I can button my own shirt again, that is." Tessa laughed, the sound bright and unexpected in the quiet room. They might, if you behave and follow doctor's orders. Over the next few weeks, Preston threw himself into his recovery with the same determination that Tessa brought to her new role as territorial marshal. He worked his damaged muscles relentlessly, progressing from the rubber ball to small weights, then to more challenging exercises. The pain was constant, but so was Tessa's encouragement. She never let him quit, never accepted his occasional backslides into self-pity. And gradually, day by day, Preston found himself looking forward to their training sessions, to the casual dinners that became less casual, to the long conversations that stretched into the night. By the time autumn painted the countryside in russet and gold, Preston could draw his gun again, not with his old lightning speed, but reliably enough to return to active duty. His first day back as deputy was marked by handshakes and congratulations from townsfolk who had written him off months before. "Feels strange," he confessed to Tessa as they walked the evening patrol together, "being welcomed back like this." "People respect resilience," she replied, her shoulder occasionally brushing against his as they walked. "You could have given up. Many would have." "I would have," Preston admitted, "if you hadn't shown up with your bossy attitude and ridiculous rubber ball." Tessa's laugh echoed in the quiet street. "Lucky for you, I'm persistent." Preston stopped walking, turning to face her. In the glow of the street lamps, her face was softer than usual, the determined marshal giving way to the woman beneath. "Lucky for me," he agreed softly. He reached for her hand with his injured one, he realized. The tremor was still there, might always be there, but it didn't matter anymore. Not when Tessa's fingers curled around his without hesitation. "I never thanked you properly," he said, "for saying those words that night. When I had Malcolm at gunpoint." "You don't need it anymore," Tessa repeated quietly. "I meant it, you know. The gun, the revenge, the guilt, you don't need any of it." Preston nodded, finding words suddenly difficult. Instead, he leaned forward and kissed her, a gentle question that Tessa answered by pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling. "What do I need then?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Tessa's eyes sparkled in the lamplight. "That's for you to figure out, Deputy Quinn. But I have a few suggestions if you're interested." As they continued their patrol, hand in hand beneath the vast western sky, Preston knew with absolute certainty that whatever tomorrow might bring, he would face it with strength, not the strength of a gun, but of something far more powerful that Tessa had helped him rediscover. And for the first time since losing his brother, he felt truly alive again. The following spring, they were married beneath the old oak tree at the edge of town, with Sheriff Daniels officiating and half the territory in attendance. Preston wore his deputy's badge proudly, and Tessa carried a bouquet of wildflowers instead of her marshal's badge for once. As they exchanged vows, Preston's hand was steady when he slipped the ring onto Tessa's finger. The weakness was still there, would always be a reminder of what he'd lost, but it no longer defined him. What defined him now was the love in Tessa's eyes, the future they would build together, and the strength they'd found in each other. When people asked about the tremor in his hand, Preston no longer told the story of the ambush and his failure. Instead, he told them about a determined woman who rode into town when he was at his lowest, and showed him that true strength had nothing to do with how steadily you could hold a gun.